Marcus Samuel and Henry Detterding. Samuel was the owner of a British company, the Shell Transport and Trading Company, a company whose business was to transport exotic shells from what is now Indonesia to Holland. Detterding ran the Royal Dutch Petroleum Company, a small oil company operating near Sumatra that was developing its own tanker fleet. The two had been in fierce competition, so with Rockefeller's model in mind, and to enable them to compete with the growing monopoly of Standard Oil, the two protagonists joined forces in 1907 to form Royal Dutch Shell.
Royal Dutch Shell was one of the first movers in the globalization of the international oil industry. One of the two first movers, really, the European equivalent, if you like, of J.D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. The most powerful man in this new combination was Henry Detterding, and he was really the equivalent European figure of John D. Rockefeller in the United States. He transformed Royal Dutch Shell into a global oil company before World War I.
Royal Dutch Shell and Standard Oil began to compete fiercely throughout the world. In Romania, for example, centuries-old traditions were succumbing to industrialization by the end of the 19th century. And although there were many foreign companies operating there, Royal Dutch Shell and Standard Oil controlled most of the country's oil wealth. It was in Azerbaijan, in the region of Baku on the Caspian Sea, that the Major's fiercest battle began. At Bibi Ibat, one of the world's first giant oil fields had been discovered. 2,500 years before, Baku was deeply connected with the Persian religion of Zoroastrianism, when the eternal fires of Baku used to flare up unexpectedly. Since that time, the surface oil has always been exploited in some way. But it wasn't until 1875 that the Nobel brothers, joined by the Rothschild and Shell companies, began to exploit the region's oil more fully. It included the building of a railway and the Baku-Bakum pipeline on the Black Sea, and became the distribution route of oil for Europe. At the turn of the 20th century, one of the greatest revolutions in transport was taking place, at a time when oil lamps were being replaced by gas lighting. It was this revolution that would give oil the powerful status it has today.
About the turn of the 20th century, the industry had been a producer of kerosene for lighting and heating purposes. At the same time, in the United States and in Europe, there was an ongoing quest for some form of automobile. Steam engine, electric power, and internal combustion gasoline were among the competitors in the auto industry, and it was not clear by about 1900 what kind of automobile would dominate in the future. The discovery of giant new sources of oil in Texas at Spindletop, later in Oklahoma, Louisiana, the southwestern U.S., assured that oil would be the power source for the automobile industry. Once that was clear, Henry Ford and others geared up to manufacture mass units of automobiles that burned gasoline refined from oil, and by the teens and 20s, the automobile industry and the mass consumption of gasoline became the primary mover in the growth of the petroleum industry.
The automobile industry, like the oil industry, was initially centered in the United States. It revolutionized daily life in this pioneering nation and propelled it once again to the fore of the industrial world. The man behind this revolution was a young farmer from Michigan, a man with a passion for the mechanical, Henry Ford. In 1896, Henry Ford handmade his first automobile, the quadricycle, built from 4 bicycle wheels, with a 4-horsepower engine. He soon realized the potential of this new means of transport. His dream was of a cheap and popular car, available to all, but his design was still being hindered by high manufacturing costs. Ford found the solution to his problem in the works of Charles Taylor, an economist and engineer who had realized the potential advantages of concepts such as the division of labor and production lines for improving the productivity of man. Ford implemented Taylor's theories at his factory in Detroit, and in 1908 he launched the famous Model T, a robust and cheap motorcar available to the masses. 15 million Model Ts were sold all over the world in just 15 years, a mark of the automobile revolution and the triumph of oil-based fuel. Intense competition began between the United States and Europe in all areas of transport using the internal combustion engine, whether air, road or sea. Aeroplanes easily won the battle for the air, which had been characterized by Zeppelin-type craft. On the seas, the supremacy of coal declined as the diesel engine became the preference of the Navy. As a result, the British government, whose sea power was at its pinnacle at the time, became keenly interested in the control of oil.
Oil became important to the British government early in the 20th century, principally because oil was a much superior fuel to coal for the Royal Navy, and Britain at the time was engaged in a race with Imperial Germany for naval supremacy. That was the principal reason for the British government seeing strategic significance in having oil supplies.
Britain's solution came in 1909 with the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later to become British Petroleum, or BP. The origins of this company began 8 years earlier in 1901. Following a lead from a French archaeologist, a wealthy English gold mine owner, William Knox D'Arcy, ventured into Persia in search of oil. He gained a mining concession from the Shah of Persia by bribing his great vizier with gold coins, and so drilling commenced. The early days were tough. D'Arcy's team had to transport heavy machinery drawn by mules along rough shepherd tracks. Their journey took them 200 kilometers from Abadan harbour through hot, semi-arid regions.
Persia at that time was economically comparatively undeveloped, and the areas where they were searching for oil were quite remote from Tehran and the centres of government. The central government had very little power in the outer reaches of Persia. So the people who were exploring for oil, William Knox D'Arcy sent a team to explore for oil. A man called George Reynolds led that team. And they were operating in very, very difficult conditions indeed. There was no infrastructure in the sense that we would understand it today. That is to say, there were no roads, no power supplies, really nothing at all to support the operation. So a lot of things had to be improvised. Transport relied on wagons and mules. A lot of the equipment they received, mostly from Britain and overseas, to conduct the search for oil, much of it arrived broken or with parts missing. The climate was very difficult. Security was a big problem because local tribes really effectively ruled the areas where they were searching for oil rather than the central government. So there were an enormous number of problems. I mean, it was really genuinely a pioneering exploration effort, and it took them 7 years to discover a giant oil field following a lot of disappointments and a lot of difficulties.
For 7 years, D'Arcy spent a fortune drilling without success,